During one of their planetary conflicts, a small group of humans was surrounded by a much larger force. Instead of surrendering or fighting to the death as any sensible species would, they charged directly at the enemy while screaming and throwing small containers of processed tree sap. What? The enemy broke ranks and fled because they assumed only complete lunatics would do something like that, and they must therefore have some sort of secret weapon or backup plan. They didn't. The humans just decided that if they were going to die anyway, they might as well confuse everyone in the process. Zekistal's color shifted to a thoughtful blue. And you believe these humans could help us against the swarm? Sir, I believe they're our best chance. The swarm can't predict what they'll do because they don't know what they'll do. They make decisions based on something they call gut feelings, which is apparently some sort of internal biological quantum computer they don't fully understand themselves. That's ridiculous. They named their most advanced AI research program Skynet, after a fictional AI that tried to wipe out humanity in their entertainment media. When asked why, they said, it seemed funny. The High Commander's tentacles went completely still. They named their most dangerous technology after something that canonically attempts to destroy them? Yes, sir. And they made jokes about it. They respond to existential threats with humor. It's actually terrifying. And you want to give these creatures access to our military technology? Sir, they already have something worse than any weapon we could give them. VenRx's mandibles clicked in what might have been nervousness, which is imagination. They look at every piece of technology and immediately think of at least 5 ways to make it more dangerous, usually by combining it with other technology in ways that violate several laws of physics. Example? They strapped primitive chemical rockets to a ground vehicle to see if it would go faster. Did it? Briefly. Very briefly. Then it exploded. They recorded it, analyzed the explosion, and tried again with different rockets. The High Commander's color shifted rapidly between several shades of disbelief. They deliberately recreated a failure scenario? They call it science. Their entire technological development is based on the principle of fuck around and find out. Language, Admiral. That's a direct quote, sir. They're very expressive. Zekistal waved a tentacle dismissively. Even if, and this is a massive if, we were to consider this insane proposal, how would we even begin to integrate humans into our military structure? Our training programs are based on logic and discipline. Actually, sir, they have a surprisingly rigid military structure of their own. They just adapt it creatively. They call it tactical flexibility or sometimes malicious compliance. I'm not familiar with either term. The first means they'll find unconventional solutions to problems. The second means they'll follow orders so precisely that they achieve results their superiors specifically tried to prevent. That makes no sense. Exactly. VenRx's mandibles clicked excitedly. That's why the swarm won't be able to predict them. They operate on what they call cartoon logic. If they don't know something is impossible, they might actually succeed. The High Commander's tentacles drooped in resignation. Give me one more example. One more reason why we should even consider this madness. They invented a beverage that's technically poison, causes their neurons to misfire, impairs their motor functions and decision-making abilities, and they drink it for fun. Then, somehow, some of them actually fight better while under its influence. That's... They call it alcohol. They've built entire cultures around its consumption. They regularly poison themselves for social bonding purposes. Zekistal was silent for a long moment. You really think they could help us defeat the swarm? Sir, I think the swarm won't know what hit them. Humans have this saying, hold my beer and watch this. It usually precedes either a brilliant success or a spectacular failure. But either way, it's never boring. And you believe this unpredictability is worth the risk? Sir, the swarm has never encountered a species that treats death as an inconvenience rather than a deterrent. Humans have a concept called posthumous bragging rights, meaning they're willing to die if it means people will tell impressive stories about them afterward. They call it going out in a blaze of glory. The High Commander's color settled into a resigned gray. Draft the proposal, but... His tentacles snapped up in warning. Start with a small group, a test case, and for the love of the void, try to find some of their more stable individuals. About that, sir. VenRX shifted uncomfortably. Their definition of stable is somewhat different from ours. They consider it normal to form emotional attachments to cleaning robots. They what? They give them names, draw faces on them, treat them like pets. One of their major corporations had to redesign a military robot because soldiers were becoming too emotionally attached to them and risking their lives to save the robots from damage. These creatures are insane. Yes, sir. That's why we need them. VenRX's mandibles clicked in what was definitely satisfaction. The swarm's greatest strength is its perfect logic, and there's nothing logical about humans. High Commander Zextal's tentacles waved in surrender. Fine, proceed with recruitment. But when this inevitably goes wrong, I want it on record that I thought it was a terrible idea. Noted, sir, though you might be interested to know that humans have a saying about terrible ideas. Do I want to know? It's only stupid if it doesn't work. Leave my office, Admiral. As VenRX turned to go, he couldn't resist one final comment. They also say yeet, sir. I'm still not entirely sure what it means, but it usually involves throwing things they shouldn't be able to lift. The only response was a long-suffering sigh and the soft sound of tentacles impacting a desk repeatedly. 3 cycles later, as VenRX watched a human marine casually juggle live plasma grenades to impress the ladies, despite there being no females of any species present, he realized that perhaps he should have mentioned their constant need to show off. Still, as the swarm fled in complete confusion from what they called weaponized stupidity, he couldn't help but feel satisfied. The humans had a saying for this too. If it looks stupid but works, it isn't stupid. He was beginning to understand why they had so many sayings about stupid things working. They're doing what with the training simulators? High Commander Zextal's tentacles were practically tied in knots. Admiral VenRX checked his datapad again, though he'd already memorized the report. They're racing them, sir. The combat simulation pods are not designed for racing. The humans disagree. They've organized what they call a pod racing tournament. They've even started taking bets on the outcomes. Zekistal's carapace shifted to a dangerous shade of crimson. Those simulators cost more than a small battleship each. Yes, sir. That's why they're being so careful with them. Careful? They're racing them. Very precisely, sir. They've actually improved the response times of the neural interfaces through what they call optimization. Apparently, the desire to go faster has led to several breakthrough improvements in our systems. The High Commander's color wavered between anger and confusion. Are you telling me they're advancing our technology by misusing it? Not exactly misusing, sir. More like creatively reinterpreting its purpose. They've also started modifying the training scenarios. How? Well, you know how our standard combat simulations are based on historical battles and logical tactical scenarios? Yes. They've added something called boss music and achievement unlocks. Also, they've started ranking their performance with letters and something called style points. Zextal's tentacles drooped. They're turning war into a game. To be fair, sir, they're getting unprecedented results. Their combat effectiveness is up 300% since implementing what they call the scoring system. Because they're treating life and death situations like entertainment? No, sir, because they're competing with each other. Did you know they've started keeping leaderboards? Boards? Yes, sir. They rank themselves based on various metrics they've invented. Most creative use of maintenance equipment in combat. Longest time survived while technically breaking every safety protocol. Best mid-battle one-liner. One-liner? They insist on making jokes during combat, sir. They say it helps with the intimidation factor. Something about psychological warfare. The High Commander's color shifted to a puzzled blue. How does humor intimidate? Apparently, their reasoning is that anyone crazy enough to joke while fighting must be extremely dangerous or completely insane. Either way, it makes their opponents nervous. That's actually somewhat logical. Don't let them hear you say that, sir. They'll take it as a challenge to be more illogical. Zextal's tentacles waved in resignation. What else have they done to our training programs? Well, they've introduced something called speedrunning, which is, they try to complete the scenarios as quickly as possible, using what they call exploits. They've found ways to skip entire sections of the simulations by breaking physics. Breaking physics? They call it clipping through walls and sequence breaking. I don't fully understand it, but they're somehow using minor calculation errors in the simulation to do things that should be impossible. And this helps with actual combat how? Sir, 3 days ago, a human sergeant defeated a swarm patrol by exploiting a similar calculation error in their targeting systems. He said, and I quote, "The hitbox detection was totally broken, so I just rushed them while they couldn't get a lock." The High Commander's tentacles went completely still. They're applying game mechanics to real combat? Yes, sir. And it's working. The swarm doesn't know how to handle opponents who treat battlefield physics as suggestions. Examples? Well, there was the incident with the gravity generators. Do I want to know? Probably not, sir. But I should mention they've started referring to our artificial gravity systems as bounce pads and launch points. Zextal's color shifted to a resigned gray. They're using our gravity control systems as transportation? They call it sick moves, sir. Apparently, if you time it right, you can use the gravity field oscillations to achieve what they call sick air. I'm afraid to ask, but results? The swarm's combat algorithms completely fail when faced with soldiers literally bouncing off the walls, sir. Their targeting systems aren't designed to handle what the humans call trick shots. The High Commander's tentacles curled in what might have been amusement. So they're winning by being unpredictable? Not just unpredictable, sir. They're being deliberately, systematically unpredictable. They're developing entire doctrines around what they call rule of cool. Which means, as far as I can tell, sir, if something looks impressive enough, they believe it has a higher chance of success. And somehow, they're right, more often than they're wrong. That's not how probability works. They know that, sir. They just don't care. In fact, they seem to take particular pleasure in defying statistical probability. Zextal was silent for a moment. The training center requisitioned additional medical supplies last week. Should I ask why? Probably not, sir. But if you're curious, they've started awarding what they call style points for particularly impressive recoveries from injury. They're competing over who can get hurt most spectacularly? No, sir. They're competing over who can continue fighting most impressively while injured. There's a difference. The High Commander's color shifted rapidly through several shades of disbelief. And this is improving their combat effectiveness? Yes, sir. The swarm's combat protocols have no contingency for an opponent who, upon losing an arm, immediately makes a joke about it costing them an arm and a leg, before using the severed limb as an improvised weapon. What? Sergeant Johnson claimed it gave him extra reach in close combat, sir. He then proceeded to clear an entire swarm nest using what he called armed combat. The pun apparently caused several nearby translation matrices to crash. Zextal's tentacles wrapped around his head in what appeared to be an attempt to contain an impending headache. Please tell me they at least take the strategic training seriously. Oh, they do, sir. They've developed several new tactical doctrines. Such as? Well, there's the Leroy Jenkins maneuver. I don't want to know. And something they call sequence breaking the encounter. Stop. And my personal favorite, the yeet and delete strategy. Admiral? Yes, sir? Just tell me we're winning. Venorex's mandibles clicked in what was definitely amusement. Sir, the swarm has begun adding warning buoys to systems where they've encountered human forces. The warnings apparently translate to beware chaos entity infestation. So they think humans are some sort of entropy elementals? To be fair, sir, that's not entirely inaccurate. The High Commander's color settled into a sort of resigned acceptance. Very well, continue with the training program, but... His tentacles snapped up in warning. Try to keep the property damage to a minimum. About that, sir. They've started keeping score of that, too. They call it collateral damage points. Get out of my office, Admiral. Yes, sir. Oh, and they've requested permission to add something called achievement unlocks to the combat scoring system. The only response was the soft thud of tentacles meeting desk once again. In the training center below, a human private was explaining to his alien squad mates why doing a backflip before throwing a grenade was technically more efficient because it looks cooler, and therefore had a higher chance of success due to rule of cool mechanics. Surprisingly, the statistics were beginning to support his theory. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. They want to do what with the battleship? High Commander Zextal's tentacles twisted in what was becoming a familiar pattern of exasperation. Admiral Venrex checked his translation matrix to make sure it hadn't malfunctioned. They want to paint flames on it, sir. Flames? on a spacefaring vessel. Yes, sir. They say it will make it go faster. That's not how space travel works. I tried explaining that, sir. They responded with something called orcish physics and insisted that red ones go faster. The High Commander's color shifted to a puzzled purple. And this is based on something called Warhammer 40,000. It's apparently a type of tactical simulation they use for entertainment. They've been using it as a reference for spacecraft modifications. Please tell me they're not actually modifying our ships based on a game. Well, Venerx's mandibles clicked nervously. They've also started naming the ships. Our vessels already have designated identifiers. Yes, sir, but they insisted that Battleship X-227 lacks what they call character. They've renamed it the Yeet Cannon. Zextal's tentacles drooped. Dare I ask why? According to Lieutenant Rodriguez, and I quote, "Because when we launch the torpedoes, we yell yeet, and that makes them hit harder." That's not... The ship's accuracy ratings have improved by 23% since the renaming ceremony, sir. The High Commander's color fluctuated between disbelief and curiosity. That's statistically impossible. They've also painted what they call a sick dragon on the bow. Combat effectiveness is up another 15%. How? They say it's because the dragon looks, and I quote, "totally badass." Zextal's tentacles wrapped around his head. And the other ships? The Absolute unit has been performing exceptionally well in frontline combat. Bodie McBoatface has the highest survival rate in the fleet, though we're still not sure why. And UWU Notice Me Senpai has somehow managed to confuse the swarm's targeting systems to the point where they simply ignore it. They ignore it? Yes, sir. The humans theorize that the name is so bizarre that the swarm's logic circuits simply refuse to acknowledge its existence. That's not how technology works. Sir, with all due respect, that's what we thought about the painted flames too. But somehow, the High Commander's color shifted to a resigned gray. What else have they done to our fleet? They've started a competition between ships. They call it pimping their ride. Their ride? It's apparently a reference to an ancient human entertainment program. Each crew is trying to make their ship look more impressive than the others. And this helps with combat how? Well, the Dabmaster, formerly Cruiser Y-115, successfully intimidated an entire swarm patrol into retreating just by activating what the humans call its party mode. Party mode? They synchronized the external lighting systems to something called dubstep and broadcast it on all frequencies. The swarm apparently couldn't process the sensory input and withdrew in confusion. Zextal's tentacles twitched. They defeated an enemy by playing music at them? While flashing lights in patterns that, according to our medical staff, could induce seizures in most species. The humans call it throwing shapes. And this is tactical? They've developed an entire doctrine around it, sir. They call it psychological warfare through superior vibing. The High Commander was silent for a long moment. The Admiralty Board is meeting next week. How do I explain that our fleet now looks like a bunch of teenagers customized it? Exactly. Well, sir, we could show them the combat statistics. Since implementing what the humans call drip, our success rate against the swarm has increased by 42%. Drip? I'm still not entirely clear on the definition, sir, but apparently it's very important that our ships look, and I quote, fresh to death. Zextal's color shifted to a warning red. What else have they done? They've started a ship-wide entertainment network they call Space TikTok. It's mostly videos of crew members performing choreographed dance routines in zero gravity. And this improves morale? Actually, yes. But more importantly, they've started incorporating the moves into evasive maneuvers. The swarm's targeting algorithms apparently can't predict the trajectory of a ship that's, in their words, hitting the woe. The High Commander's tentacles curled in confusion. They're using dance moves as combat maneuvers? Yes, sir. The Naruto run has proven particularly effective for destroyer-class vessels. I'm afraid to ask, but the results? Our fleet's survival rate has tripled. The swarm seems completely unable to adapt to what the humans call mixing sick beats with sick feats. Zextal's color shifted through several shades of resignation. And I suppose they want to expand this program? They've submitted a proposal for something called Pimp My Battleship, Extreme Edition. Denied. They anticipated that response, sir. They've prepared a comprehensive presentation on how, and I quote, making things look totally rad actually makes them work better, because that's how the universe do. That's not grammatically correct. They say that's part of the aesthetic, sir. The High Commander's tentacles drooped in defeat. Fine, approve the modifications, but... His tentacles snapped up in warning. Tell them to keep the flames reasonable. About that, sir. They've already started installing something called underglow on the capital ships. Get out. Yes, sir. Though you might be interested to know they've also developed something called drift racing for the fighter squadrons. The only response was the now familiar sound of tentacles impacting desk. In the hangar bay below, a human pilot was explaining to his alien wingmates why painting their fighters to look like ancient Earth creatures called sharks would make them more aerodynamic in space. Somehow the test flights were proving him right. The universe, it seemed, had not only a sense of humor but also an appreciation for style. Continued.